Welcome to Issues That Matter. I'm Cynthia Pooler. My guest today is Jose Vega, and Jose will be doing commentary on the presidential election, for the duration and maybe even beyond that on a regular basis. So, and I want to introduce you to Jose and a little bit about me, even though I've done tons of interviews. So, Jose, the first time I saw you on a video, and of course, I met you through Diane Sayer, but the first time I saw you on a video, you were confronting AOC. Uh, and then you confronted Hakeem Jeffries, and I thought that was pretty bold of you. How long have you been involved in politics, and how long have you been confronting all the politicians that you do?
Well, I've been involved in politics, I guess, I don't know, since I was about 15, 16 years old when I met Diane's organization, the LaRouche organization. And really, I've been hooked since then. It's really been a pursuit of truth. Politics is not, the pragmatic idea that people have where it's just a bunch of talking heads, sitting in the Capitol arguing all day about what the right policy is. I think politics is really about a pursuit of truth. And also, what that means is it involves studying all aspects of science, whether it's microbiology, chemistry, or physics, or also, or geometry, especially, as a big foundation of truth. But also a real deep and rich understanding of culture. I think a statesman needs to have a real understanding of all these aspects more than just rudimentary. They really need to have an endeavor of it, a real pursuit of truth to really understand how to govern. I think that is what qualifies somebody to be a real politician. I think it was President Garfield who had his own proof for the Pythagorean theorem, right? I think Benjamin Franklin, in my opinion, is one of the best examples of what a real statesman should be like. These people, our founding fathers, were extremely educated in all fields of science and mathematics, geometry, and culture. And I think that's something we've lost today. And I think that, me joining this organization, it's been a big revival to bring that back. Politics.
When you put on the cable news networks, there's a lot of fibs that they tell, untruths, and the people believe that. And I like the YouTube videos and getting the message out this way. But I think, and maybe I'm wrong, but do you think there's a vast number of people who watch and listen to what we say, or are they still plugged into the mainstream media?
I think there will be. I mean, it's starting to emerge right now. If you look at what Tucker Carlson did, kind of opening the floodgates on that, I mean, you had a lot of commentators before then that had a decent number of views, but really couldn't compete with the mainstream. Now you can. I mean, Tucker Carlson got like 130 million views on his first episode out of being from Fox on the Twitter show. I mean, that's not something that the mainstream news could ever dream of having. And it just goes to show, I mean, as I've told this to their faces, that they're dying and that the public doesn't want them and trust them anymore. And that's why they're going to alternative sources of information.
Somebody like Rachel Maddow or Joe Scarborough isn't going to say, well, I'm quitting MSNBC and I'm going to do a YouTube video from now on. I don't see that happening. What do you think?
Well, they can scream and shout and pout all they want, but And that's what it is too. They are very angry at people like Tucker Carlson and alternative media because the way they have to get away with it is they have to call it the fringe right or the online fringe conspiracy theory. And that's the only way they can really kind of cope with the fact that they're starting to die off now. And no, they're not going to switch because they're going to go down with the ship sinking.
But the ship is sinking. Don't they realize that?
Yeah, probably. They probably do. And that's why, well, you have to see everything kind of tied into the political world and like with this potential World War III that we're about to have right now. You know, the media, the media has always been the main tool of the oligarchy. And if that goes, the oligarchy is going to probably blow up the world before they ever decide to relinquish any control. I mean, I know it's a scary thought to think about, but the people who run our world are suicidal psychopaths. And, my friend Kynan and I have actually been digging into this epidemic of suicide, of psychopathic State Department people. I mean, people like to investigate, Ted Bundy or these other serial killers as to like, who they are and their role in why they became the serial killers they became.
Mhm.
But what about the serial killers in our State Department? Which
Right.
there are many, and Victoria Nuland is one small example. I mean, I can't even say too much about her on this program because we will get demonetized on YouTube. But one of the problems with her is that she grew up with a bipolar mother, and her father was severely depressed. And the way he put it was he wouldn't even get out of bed until like 11, 12 p.m. And he had to, and this is when he was the chief resident at Yale, and then he had to be institutionalized when Victoria was 13 years old. Okay, so you don't need a psychotherapist to tell you somebody growing up in that kind of environment is prone to manipulation, is prone to psychopathic tendencies. And then we know that the State Department actually actively recruits people who have those kinds of tendencies. There's more about her that I just cannot say on YouTube because, again, it will get the video taken down. But we do know from people like John Perkins, who wrote a book called Confessions of an Economic Hitman.
Mm-hmm.
In chapter 1, when he's talking about being screened by the NSA, he started giving them negatives about the time he lied to the police, about the time that he completely opposed the Vietnam War, about the fact that he was very rebellious against his father and that he had all these frustrations. And he thought that that was enough to get him, kicked out of the NSA, but that was actually what they were looking for. They were actively looking for the negative qualities in people because that's what made them seducible and manipulatable. And that's exactly what we see. And so even though Victoria Nuland is very high up in the State Department, she's also a drop in the bucket because I have a sinking feeling that all these people in the State Department have similar manipulative backgrounds. And it's important to investigate, and we're starting to crack through that kind of wall.
So the thing is, like, so many people watch cable news and they believe what they're hearing. How do you have a conversation with somebody who's listening to all that baloney and they won't listen to your point of view? What do you do then? Just
Yeah.
send them on their merry way and say, "Oh, you're thinking this, okay."
No, I think it's important to challenge people's thinking all the time. And if they don't want to listen or if they go away in anger, well, that's on them. I mean, that's just tragedy. That's something that Diane and the organization have been talking about, this issue of tragedy. I'll give you an example. Back when we were doing the Rage Against the War Machine, you remember this?
Yep.
There were people who had the audacity to put out articles saying, well, that the Rage Against the War Machine people are exaggerating the risk of nuclear war so that they can raise all this money and waste it and spend it all. And That's no excuse to work with people who are racist or anti-Semitic or whatever stupid thing they were saying that was clearly a lie. Um, it's just the issue of tragedy. People are more interested in their own oppression and being oppressed than actually standing up and fixing it.
So, you tell us a little bit about the politicians that you've confronted. I know you've confronted AOC, and she came in as the darling of the left. And do you think she when she first was elected,
Mm.
do you think her heart was in the right place?
Well, yes, I do. I do think that even though people have pointed me to things where she was groomed by the CIA a few years before, and she was also like interning for, I forget which Kennedy. I think it was Joe Kennedy or something. No relation to RFK Jr., but she was interning for a senator who had the name Kennedy, um, and which was a pretty high up position. And so she clearly had experience in working in politics before she was a congresswoman. Regardless, though, I do think, excuse me, I do think her heart was in the right place when she was elected. And I believed in her, kind of. I mean, I remember I wrote to her an email because at the time that she won her primary, and in New York City, if you won a Democratic primary, you were basically guaranteed a general election win because,
Mhm.
well, nobody here votes Republican. And so the thinking was Democrat, sure win. So when I was going through a situation where my apartment had collapsed and from the ceiling because of all the sewage water that was collected on the top, and the landlord chose not to do anything about it, I emailed her and her team, saying, and if people can find this tweet on my Twitter, I said, if you really are the real deal, you'll help me because I don't know what to believe in anymore, and I don't know who to go for help anymore. And I don't think I ever got a response back. And I mean, I forgave her for that because, okay, maybe she's busy. Tons of people are going to ask me for help. We'll see. But, when she was crying about voting for the Iron Dome or something, and then when she voted to send money to Ukrainian Nazis, what happens is you make moral concessions in order to get by. Because before she was a congresswoman, she was talking about being okay with being a one-term congresswoman. She was talking about shaking up and causing a ruckus to the establishment. Well, she's always voted with the establishment, and the only time she's dissenting opinion or the voting no is when they know there's more congressmen who are going to allow the bill to pass than they won't be, right? So they are only allowed to dissent when they're allowed to by the Democratic Party, and they are impotent because of their party. And because of all the moral concessions she's had to make, and because of all the time she's had to quote compromise, she's become corrupted and she's lost her way. And I think it's a sad thing to see because now she's completely controlled and manipulated by the people who around her who keep her on a leash. And I genuinely think when my friend Kynan and I confronted her, I think it did shake something in her mind quickly, even if it was just for a second. It reminded her that she does have a consciousness in there. And I think, I mean, I think it's still possible to shake her conscience loose
Mhm.
from the grasp of her PR people and the people who put her on magazines, because like what RFK Jr. did recently, where he asked the Biden administration to do something. And people say, well, how could you ask the Biden administration to do something? They'll never listen. Well, I don't know. I think we can also make that same demand of people like AOC who can say, okay, this has gone too far. And I would be the first to welcome her back in that fight.
Mm. What about Hakeem Jeffries? You also confronted him.
No, he's not somebody I think is completely innocent. I think that guy's see. You have to look at like how old they are and also what position they are. I mean, he's the House Democrat minority leader, meaning that he would be Speaker of the House
Right.
if Kevin McCarthy did not have the majority. And I remember being at a town hall with Jamal Bowman and Hakeem Jeffries in September, a couple weeks before I confronted AOC. And Bowman there was talking about, here's the future Speaker of the House right there. So I had a little bit of insider information. It wasn't super insider, but this was just before Nancy Pelosi had announced she was going to retire from being Speaker of the House. And so they were talking about Hakeem Jeffries being the next Speaker of the House because the midterms were coming up. And they wanted, Hakeem to be the Speaker of the House. His corruption happened a long time ago. And I do think there is kind of a time limit when you're very settled into the corruption. Not only do you become a part of the corruption, you also start doing it yourself. Whereas AOC and the squad, I think, are just caught in that wave of corruption where they're being pushed around and they're not fighting back. That happened to Hakeem Jeffries a long time ago. And now he's the one controlling the waves too. Just like a Nancy Pelosi, who I think is just too old. I mean, can these people be redeemed? In one sense, yes, because they're human beings and human beings can be redeemed. All human beings can be redeemed. I'm a big believer in that. But the likelihood of it, though, is very unlikely. They're very much tied into this. And so, in order for a Hakeem Jeffries or even a Nancy Pelosi to be redeemed would mean to be confronted with the evils that they've done and really understand it, and they choose to suppress it. I think that's why Nancy Pelosi J drinks all the time. But
Did you ever confront with Diane Schumer?
Diane confronted Schumer, and I did not.
Okay.
Twice, I think.
Okay. Because I'm looking in terms of the kill list. As a Jewish person, he's aligned himself with the Nazis, right?
Yes, that's right. That's right. He's a big proponent for Ukraine and for funding for Ukraine, and he's the reason why a lot of money goes to Ukraine. He's one of those senators that are up there in terms of that kind of influence. And you're right. He is Jewish, and
Right.
he is not blind to the fact that there are Ukrainian neo-Nazis. I mean, congressional members have raised the alarm before on this. Hakeem Jeffries had raised the alarm before that there were neo-Nazis in Ukraine. And, I mean, they just don't care. They think they can kind of just wipe away the memory of the American citizenry. And I think the American people are better than that.
So I've been watching closely Robert Kennedy's campaign, and people say, "Oh no, how could you support an anti-vaxxer?" I mean, that's out there. He's talking about, stopping, if possible, the potential of a nuclear war. How come people are just concentrating on the anti-vaccine stuff?
Well, because it's the only thing. I mean, I've only been looking into the anti-vax claims and stuff about RFK Jr. And I think where he's strongest is casting doubt on these public institutions. Like, can you really trust the public institutions to have your best interest in mind? That's a legitimate question. I mean, and it's not that he does expose some examples of people's incompetence when it comes to vaccines. That's as far as I'll go on that, because I don't know the science in regards to the actual vaccines themselves. I mean, I've been double vaxxed. In other words, I got the Moderna shot, the 2 shots you're supposed to get. Never got a booster shot because by the time I was supposed to get it, I had gotten sick with COVID, and then I never got the booster again. And so, in terms of RFK Jr. and the anti-vax stuff, look, I just think what's needed is a scientific revolution in discourse. There needs to be more trust in public health again. I think people have legitimate concerns to be distrustful of public health institutions, given the fact that they were censoring everybody, questioning otherwise, and they were not allowing any kind of discourse to happen. It's the reason why people distrusted the public health institutions. And I fear another pandemic, because what if there is one that has like a 15-20% mortality rate, and people don't want to get vaccinated or treated because they don't trust the institutions? I fear. But anyway, the reason they focus on the anti-vax stuff is because that's the only weapon they have against RFK Jr. RFK Jr. presents a very legitimate threat against Biden and against the entire US establishment. And RFK Jr. is not stupid when it comes to his role in overthrowing that. In fact, he has denied doing certain events because he believes the CIA will kill him. I mean, he said this publicly, and and his security doesn't let him go out alone and stuff. And he is somebody who, after that speech he gave in New Hampshire on June 20th, in terms of the foreign policy speech, has changed a lot. It's changed everything. Everything has changed. Like his campaign now has the potential to change policy right now this year. That's really how good I think he's running his campaign. And I'm very excited to see where it goes, because he did something I think that not a lot of candidates do, or a lot of candidates say they want to do and never do. He called on Biden at the end. He said, I call on the present administration, who will be in power for at least another year and a half, to follow my uncle, President John F. Kennedy's maxims when it comes to ending this war. And then he asked people to elevate their voices against the insanity of nuclear war. That's called building a movement right there. And that's called building a united front, I think. I don't know if I'll be voting for RFK Jr. in the general election one, because I don't know if he'll make it past the Democratic primary. But in one way, I kind of hope he does. But even then, I don't think it matters, because we have a year and a half left till we have to vote. And Lindsey Graham just came out saying, urging Congress that if the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant gets melted down, that it was the Russians, and that has to trigger NATO Article 5, meaning we have to treat it as it was an attack on all of us, therefore triggering World War III. I think it's a very scary situation right now. And I think RFK Jr.'s ability to stop it.
Yes, we are in scary territory. Now, I'm a little bit older than you, and I remember JFK. I remember Robert Kennedy, and they were both snuffed out. And I'm afraid that something like this might happen to people who speak out. From your perspective, do you think we are in very scary times?
Yes, I think, yes, I do think we are in very scary times. And that's honestly putting it lightly, because everything could be gone by the time we finish the Zoom meeting. It could be gone in the middle of the Zoom meeting. I mean, people don't understand what we're playing with here. I think people had a better sense of it during the Cuban Missile Crisis. We are in something 10 times more dangerous and more serious than the Cuban Missile Crisis right now. And I think that's by design, that they've managed to make people unafraid of nuclear war by saying, no, nobody wants a nuclear war. Don't worry, we don't want a nuclear war. It's okay. So therefore there won't be one. And it's like, come on, people need to start thinking about the fact that the inevitable is a nuclear war. If World War III breaks down, it's not going to be fought with conventional weapons and means. In fact, the only reason why Ukraine is being fought with conventional methods and means, and what I mean is like boots on the ground, tanks and stuff. The only reason I say that is because Ukraine is a proxy for the United States, right? To not have to use nuclear weapons. And there have been headlines already saying, give Ukraine low tech or tactical nuclear missiles, which is not, is nuts, right? once you cross that nuclear threshold, and we were towing the line with depleted uranium shells. Okay, but once you cross that line, seriously, once you drop that first nuclear bomb, even if it's tiny, and you open that door, get into a bunker, go to Mount Zion, do something, go live off the land, or I don't know, you're it's done, it's over.
Right, right. So you and I are going to have conversations on a frequent basis. We're going to cover what's going on as far as the presidential campaign, and any final thoughts right now about what you'd like to talk about?
I think for one, it should be trying to inform people of what's going on so that they can elevate their voices. As RFK Jr. asked people to raise their voices against this nuclear war. And I think, keeping people in the loop, hopefully
Mhm.
bring good news, keep people informed on the presidential candidates, and really fight through the media and fight through the lies of the media.
Right. That's perfect. So we'll talk again soon. You've been listening to Jose Vega. I'm Cynthia Pooler. This is Issues That Matter. And if you like this show, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Have a great day, Jose, and thank you everybody for listening.